I should move that further.
Those things that are lawful are those things that involve your rights. You have a right in this country to claim any right. It doesn't matter what that right is, as long as it doesn't cause harm to any other individual. What is known as corpus delicti, or the body of a crime, is what is the cause of a crime, where you've actually caused harm to another, or actually violated their rights in some manner or another. Those things that are legal are much different from those things that are lawful. Those things that are legal are contractual terms and conditions. Something may not necessarily be lawful, like you can waive your rights in a contract. You can waive your right to speak freely. And if you do that, it can be illegal for you to speak, while it is still lawful. And in this country, courts do not entertain cases where standing in corpus delicti cannot be established. At least they're not supposed to. That's where the majority of tyranny we see in government comes from. All of those violation tickets that you have to deal with through your everyday lives, those speeding tickets or seatbelt tickets, issues where you've not actually harmed someone else. You're not actually liable for any kind of a fine or penalty. You do not actually owe anyone money for that. Now, if you have actually caused harm, the story is much different. Say you run a red light and you crash into someone else. You are responsible for that. But if you run a red light and you do not cause harm to anyone else, you're not actually liable for any kind of fine or penalty. Even though you shouldn't run red lights, it happens on occasion for a judgment call, where you have to decide whether or not you're going to be able to make it through the intersection in time. Things like that of that nature. When in court, words are very important. You might not know the definition of the words that they're using while you think you do. This is one of the main points in which the Law Society has taken back America to England from us. The British Accreditation Registry. I'm sure all of the lawyers are going to dislike what I have to say now. Anyone who swears an oath to the British Accreditation Registry swears an oath to England. Their oath of allegiance to England, to the crown, and in return, they receive a title of nobility, Esquire. Their job is not to protect you. Their job is to protect the courts that they took over in 1812. The words that you use in common English have much different meanings from the words that they use, but you will assume that they are common English when they're not. Words like person, words like guilty, not guilty. These words have very big different definitions than they have in common English. If you walk into a court of law and you claim to be not guilty, you're claiming that you're not going to pay. Now, if you've already claimed that you understand their charges, you fall into dishonor, and this is where you get into trouble in the courts. The court system is more about honor and dishonor than it is what you did to actually get your ticket for. A ticket is just a notice of a bill of exchange. And how you deal with these is going to be how the court deals with you. To stay in honor, all you have to do is send back a notice of your own. You can discharge their notice with your own notice. Go to any notary public. This is a very common service that they have today. A common law notary public, which is much different from a civil law notary who is a lawyer. Essentially, to deal with these situations, the main notices that you're going to be using are notices of protest for non-acceptance and notices of protest for non-presentment. Most of the time when you get pulled over by an officer, he has no idea what he's doing. He's just following a program. And the first thing you should do is ask him for the cause and nature of the traffic stop. And if you don't, you've automatically consented to his authority. Not consenting is different from assenting. You do not need to achieve assent to achieve consent. You can give your consent when you do nothing. What the officer wants to present you is simply a bill of exchange. If you do not sign it, they will claim that you are not honoring it, and they will take you right to jail. But that's not how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to be able to see a magistrate before you have any kind of prison sentence. Even being placed temporarily in jail overnight to see a judge is not acceptable in this country. The best thing to do in these situations is to sign under protest and duress, because if you don't, they're going to take you to jail. Your only way out is this signature of protest under duress, which essentially nullifies the contract as soon as you sign it, which they usually don't know. What you want to do is identify that instrument as a bill of exchange. Most times doing this, the officer will just get back in his car and walk away. Sometimes, however, they will not. And when they don't, what you do is you take that notice that you've signed, protest under duress, right to a notary public, and you send that notice right to the police station that issued the ticket. They have then 3 days to prove that the original notice was presented or to present you with the original bill. And if they do not, then the officer who wrote you the ticket is liable to pay it. The court system has been overrun by England. We're not supposed to have to deal with endless volumes of code to live under. Not when there is law, the common law, your highest rights. Your highest rights are the highest laws in this country. Let's not forget that the reason men and women form governments to begin with is to protect those blessings of life, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the entire scope and jurisdiction of the courts, to protect the people of the state. But that's not really what we have anymore, is it? We no longer have we the people. And the state has become nothing more than a corporation, a fictitious, legally created entity whose only goal is to extract capital from you. Dealing with police is important. You don't want to approach them with ignorance or insult their intelligence. All you have to do is question the words that they are using. Without these words, they cannot claim any power over you. In order to assert a right and defend it, all you have to do is speak up. It's not really all that difficult. But in this day and age, we've all been taught that exercising our rights without government permission is a crime. Licensing is something that I need to cover now. Because when you submit your application for registration to the DMV and you obtain a license, you have given away your right to travel in exchange for that privilege to drive. It happens every time with every licensed activity. These activities are permission given from government that you can then engage in. But not accepting this privilege does not remove that right from you. It is not it is not unlawful to travel in your automobile if you do not have a license. Unless you're doing commerce on the roadways, you have no requirement of law to carry a license. You don't even have to have identification in this country. That's why we are free. Most of the time, when you give identification to an officer, you're basically giving him more evidence that you are the type of person that he can interact with and enforce these statutory requirements upon. All of those terms and conditions of the Department of Motor Vehicles Code are just terms and conditions of a contract that you agree to voluntarily. If you don't want to agree to those terms and conditions, just exercise the right instead of accepting the privilege blindly. There can be some benefits to these privileges, but benefits are never worth giving up your rights for. Yes, if you have a driver's license, you have a limited liability protection. But you also don't have your rights anymore. And you can't claim them in court once you've waived them voluntarily, because that judge has your signature on a registration application sitting right in front of him where you have waived all of your rights. To get back to the self-governing part of the self-governing constitutional republic, there are a lot of responsibilities that come with these rights. Your highest responsibility when exercising any right is to cause no harm to another through that exercise of your right. Every one of us have equal rights. We are all equal and we are all kings. We are all royalty within ourselves. My rights don't extend past the boundary of your rights. I cannot violate your rights. If I do, I've committed a crime. A crime is always and only the violation of rights, as law is always and only the lawful defense of individual rights. That is what law is. Everything else is designed to confuse people. That is why lawyers write these codes. It's called code. You were never meant to understand it. And then they will try to use these codes to generate liability upon you, which is completely unlawful. It might as well be written in Chinese. If it is not your native tongue, and they claim openly in court that you cannot use these words because you can't possibly understand them, how can they then use those codes to generate liability upon you lawfully? They cannot. They only think they can. And by your consent, this is how it's achieved. When in court, if you claim to understand charges, you have just said something that has ramifications most people do not understand. Claiming to understand charges in court is consent. You at that very moment have given your consent to the court to enforce those policies upon you. Okay. I spoke a couple minutes ago and mentioned that the British Accreditation Registry took over the courts. This was achieved in 1812, by the War of 1812. It is no coincidence that the efforts of that war were meant to destroy the evidence of the ratification of the original 13th Amendment that many people don't even know existed. There was an amendment to the Constitution passed that prevented all lawyers from obtaining offices of public trust. Now, they should not be able to obtain these offices even without this amendment, because lawyers have already sworn an oath of allegiance to England. They could not possibly swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution without committing perjury. Lawyers being in office is the very reason we have what we have today in this country, where we no longer live under the rule of law, but the rule of lawlessness, the rules of men. Mankind was never fit to govern one another, but only to govern ourselves. That is why we have a self-governing constitutional republic and not a democracy. I'm going to read the text of the original 13th Amendment. I do believe I have it here. There it is. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall without the consent of Congress accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them.